Grace, peace, and mercy are yours from the triune God. I'm preaching to you from outside today, from Van Patten Woods. Why? Just because I can. Because it's Northern Illinois, a week into November, and I have begun to realize just how precious every drop of sunshine is. When you are in the Northern Hemisphere around this time, every year you begin to realize that the nights come fast and the mornings come slow. And we spend more than half of our time in the vulnerabilities and uncertainties that nighttime brings. And we spend our time waiting with bated breath for the morning. So it goes every year. Every year, as autumn winds down and winter begins to introduce itself to us once again, we are reminded of just how precious the sunshine is and just how scary the nighttime can be. But this year feels different. All year, no matter how long the days, I think so many of us have felt vulnerable and uncertain and scared. And we have been waiting all year. We have been waiting for the end of the pandemic. We have been waiting for the end of the quarantine. We have been waiting for COVID test results. We have been waiting for our opportunity to see our loved ones in person again. We have been waiting for the opportunity to meet our new grandchildren, or to see our children in other states. We have been waiting and wondering whether or not we will be able to celebrate Thanksgiving and Christmas and all those ways that we have cherished for so long. We have been waiting to pray together in our sanctuary. We have been waiting to sing together in choir. We have been waiting to ring the handbells again. And so it feels a little cruel for the winter to come on so quickly, for the daylight to leave us so soon, because we've already been waiting for daybreak, haven't we? We have been waiting all night long, just like those 10 bridesmaids. Today's parable might seem a little opaque. That's the point of a parable. It gives us a strange story and asks us to imagine what possibilities it might mean. It engages us in a creative process. But for us to really understand what it is that this parable about these 10 virgins, these 10 bridesmaids is trying to say to us, we might need to look at its context first. This parable comes to us in Jesus' last sermon. Jesus' last sermon takes place on the Mount of Olives, which is a cemetery in Jerusalem. He is surrounded by whitewashed tombs, and from his place in the tombs, he can see Golgotha, the place that he will die very soon. And he gives his followers a series of parables as part of a sermon on how to live once he is gone. Like many, many ancient Jewish texts, the most important part of this sermon is not at the beginning, but in the end. And the end of this sermon is one of Jesus' most famous sayings: "As you have done unto the least of these, you have done unto me." And the righteous, it says in this sermon, ask Jesus, "When have we treated you all these ways that you are telling us?" And Jesus tells them, "I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you cared for me. I was in prison and you visited me." And every time that we interact, Jesus tells us that every time we interact with someone who is hungry or thirsty or in prison or naked or a stranger to us, we are interacting with him. with Christ himself. That is the climax of this last sermon. That is what this parable about the 10 bridesmaids is building up to. But that still seems pretty opaque to me. I don't know what 5 foolish virgins has to do with taking care of the hungry and thirsty. So we have to go back further. This is Jesus' last sermon before he dies. And a lot of the context of this sermon we actually find in his very first sermon in Matthew. This sermon has a lot of similarities. It also takes place on a mountain, so we call it the Sermon on the Mount. And you might know it by its most famous part, which is the beginning, the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. I'm not saying these in order, but you probably know them. And also in that sermon, the most important part comes at the end. In the first sermon, the most important part is actually the Lord's Prayer. The Beatitudes lead up to this climax in which Jesus teaches us how to pray. Just as in this last sermon, the series of parables, the 10 bridesmaids included, builds up to a sermon on how to live ethically when Jesus is not physically present before us. But sandwiched between their famous beginnings and famous ends, both of these sermons share another part of their content. In the middle of the first sermon and the last sermon both, there is a segment on light, on lamps. Why would you preach about, so this is just getting more confusing, right? We have a parable about 10 bridesmaids and lamps, and that tells us about ethical living, or we have the Beatitudes and the saying about light and the Lord's Prayer. But bear with me. In the first sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, with the Beatitudes and the Lord's Prayer, Jesus says to his followers, "You are the light of the world. Let your light so shine before others that it may glorify your Father in heaven." And in his last sermon, he revisits the theme of light with the 10 bridesmaids. The 5 wise ones who knew to bring enough oil to keep their lights shining, and the 5 foolish ones who ran out of oil and whose light went out. Taken together, they seem to clarify each other a little bit more. They seem to say, you are the light of the world. You better bring enough oil to keep shining for everyone. Beloved, I don't think our wait is nearly over. I don't think the pandemic is going to be over by Thanksgiving. And even if we soon get clarifying election results, even if we get a perfect vaccine for the coronavirus and it's distributed quickly, I don't think the underlying things that made this year so hard are going to go away quite so soon. The night is long, and the racial injustice, the polarization, the political unrest, I'm afraid to say that these things aren't going away anytime soon. And Jesus, when we turn to him for comfort in this time of waiting, in the gloom of night, says to us that we are the light of the world. He gives us a responsibility in these times, that we must bring enough oil to make sure that our light keeps shining. When we are afraid and alone, Jesus tells us you need to draw on the source, on the oil, so that way you can keep doing good works that glorify your Father in heaven. This is a big responsibility, Because Jesus is saying to us, what we do as Christians can remind people of our Father in heaven. Our actions can glorify God, or they can't. And Jesus isn't giving us a cold comfort of saying, it'll be over soon. You know, I'll be back before you know it. He's saying, you don't know when I'll be back, but the wait might be long. So pack extra compassion. Store extra mercy. Bring enough kindness and justice to last you through the night. And in all these things, though our responsibilities as people of God are great, we are not left alone. Instead, we are reminded that if we are the light of the world, if our actions are those things that glorify God, then God is the oil that lights those lamps. God is the fuel that keeps us going. As we prepare for a long night, and as we gear up to fulfill our moral responsibilities, I encourage you to fill up on God. I encourage you to pray. I encourage you to remember that God is empowering you every step of the way to choose justice and mercy, integrity and compassion. God is giving you strong roots and a hand to reach out. You, people of God, are the light of the world. You better bring enough oil to last you this whole night long. Thanks be to God.